Thank you for watching this Sustainability Chat. The Sustainability Institute's free programming is only available thanks to our generous members and supporters. If you find what we do meaningful, please consider becoming a member today by heading to our website, sustaininstitute.com. Once there, you can find more information by clicking the Become a Member or Donate button at the top of your screen. Membership support at any level is greatly appreciated, and your contribution is tax deductible. We especially want to thank our highest tier members, including our committed advocates and cheering champions. Thank you. Now on to today's Sustainability Chat with LeaderEthics.
Welcome to another edition of Sustainability Chats. My name is Casey Meehan. I'm the Director of Programming at the Sustainability Institute. The Sustainability Institute is a 501c3 organization located in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And our mission is to catalyze sustainable action in the Seven Rivers region. We do this by educating about local issues and solutions, advocating for climate action, connecting like-minded organizations and people to each other, and finally by inspiring a positive vision for a sustainable future. Now, if you're familiar with the Sustainability Institute, we frame our sustainability work using the Good Life Goals. These are a set of goals based on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and it's a framework for thinking more holistically about sustainability as a pathway to help us and our communities thrive. Of course, we need a clean environment and a stable climate, but to truly thrive, our communities need much more. We need access to good jobs. We need good health and well-being. We need equitable access to services and amenities. And we need a voice in the decisions that impact our lives. Now, all of these goals are interconnected, but today in particular, we're focused on goal number 16. Goal 16 is about building and promoting peaceful and inclusive societies. This includes things like resisting corruption and the abuse of power, supporting institutions that support people, and redoubling our efforts to create accountable and inclusive institutions at all levels. Given today's political climate in the US, this is no doubt an important mission. So today, we're meeting with Lee Rosh, who's the Executive Director of LeaderEthics, and he's going to share a bit more about the work that he's doing and how it's connected to helping our communities thrive. So welcome, Lee, to the Sustainability Institute Sustainability Chat.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
It's great to have you. First, just help us understand here what LeaderEthics is and how did it come about? So in other words, why this and why now?
Okay, well, as you know, I was president at Western Technical College for quite a few years. And when I retired, I was determined that I would analyze what I could do or should do for this next phase in my journey. And I didn't want to just collect about a bunch of things to do. And so I started having coffee and a conversation with people I knew and respected, community leaders, business leaders, elected officials, friends, family, and let those conversations kind of help lead me to what my interests were and where I could best apply my efforts. And that really, a lot of the concerns that came out had to do with the concerns about the American democracy and where we're going. And a lot of that was generated around concerns about the ethics that we were seeing lacking in the way our nation was being led and our state was being led. So it led to the formation of a 501c4 nonprofit, nonpartisan organization called LeaderEthics. And our focus is on promoting ethical leadership among elected officials. And by our definition, ethical leaders are truthful, they're transparent with public information, they're unifiers rather than dividers, and to the best of their ability, they focus on representing their entire constituency, not just the simple majority that might vote for them. Now, those are actually normal expectations if you're in business or education or healthcare. And the question we raise is, why not in the political arena? Why shouldn't we expect ethical leadership of the people that are representing us? So that led to where we are today, and we're now in our 7th year.
That's amazing, 7 years. So a follow-up question to that is, what have you seen change over the last, let's say, 20 years or 30 years about about ethics and politics that made you want to address this?
Well, I think several things happened, and that there's been a significant transition in the political divide and the way our parties interact. And but what I also saw was that that at a time, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, people would be embarrassed at making some of the statements that you hear today or see today that are commonplace. And because of that, it's a change in our expectations that it's been significant. And that led to what we are doing now is we're trying to highlight through our speaker events or through our monthly ethics report good examples of ethical leadership in practice and some examples that aren't so good, so that we can help citizens recognize what they should be looking for in an ethical leader.
And I know that you talk a lot about society losing trust in some of the cornerstone institutions of our country, so media and business and education and the government. Why does that matter?
Well, trust is a huge issue, and it's not just about politics. It's a breakdown in trust in many institutions. Let's take a look at some of the slides that I think exemplify why this is a problem. For example, if we look at this slide here, this is a study by the Pew Research Center, and it shows that in the late 90s, 2/3 of the American population had confidence that other Americans were going to make good political decisions. And if you see what's happened now, that's completely flipped, where maybe only 1/3 of Americans have confidence in the political decisions, the democratic decisions by other citizens. And that's a huge concern. Let's take a look at the next slide, though. This is a study done by Gallup, and they've been doing this, tracking this information for a couple of decades now. And basically they ask, do you have a great deal of confidence or considerable confidence in these various institutions? And this shows that we have considerable confidence in small business and in the military, but there's a significant drop off from there. In fact, if you look at from the medical system on down, church or organized religion, Supreme Court, banks, public schools, the presidency, large technology companies, organized labor, newspapers, the criminal justice system, television news, big business, Congress, all of them are at 1/3 or less in terms of confidence as an institution. Now, if you were in manufacturing and you were producing a product and you couldn't get that product, that would be a huge problem for you. Well, trust and integrity is a commodity for these institutions. And so if there isn't the trust in these organizations, that's a bigger issue than just politics. And so that's a big concern for us. Finally, the next slide exemplifies that this is not just about political policy issues. If you look at the concern that's coming from various business organizations, the Harvard School of Business reports that political dysfunction is the #1 obstacle to economic competitiveness. The Wall Street Journal reports that escalating political polarization is the second most emerging risk, and they compare that only second to generative artificial intelligence, which is kind of an interesting analysis. And then finally, the Society of Human Resource Management reports that 1 in 4 workers report differential treatment due to their political views at the workplace. So let's go back to the regular screen now. So you can see that this isn't just about politics. This is about a lack of confidence that it's infecting us in our workplace, in our family lives, and it's important for us to talk about that so that we can take some significant steps, some actions to try to address that.
So I noticed in the first graph where that trust flipped around 2011 or so. I'm going to put you on the spot. Is there something that happened? Why then?
Well, it happened a little earlier, and I believe it coincided with the Great Recession. And we lost confidence in our government's ability to serve as a leader that we anticipated that they would do earlier. There were probably other factors as well, but I think that's probably was one significant reason.
Sure. And so how is LeaderEthics working to now rebuild that trust?
Well, first of all, I want to point out that it's not just about political leaders either. The divisiveness that we have isn't just about the politicians. It's more complicated than that. In fact, I kind of view it as it's layered. There are layers of issues and the dynamics that we're facing. And one of the significant factors is it's disinformation and misinformation. And of course, disinformation is false information that is intentionally communicated to try to mislead people. And misinformation is false information that may or may not be intentional, but they're both bad. Now, back in the 2016 election, there was an effort by the country of Russia, St. Petersburg, Russia, through a formation of an organization called the Internet Research Agency, the IRA. And they were pumping out phony social media ads, primarily Facebook and Instagram, but other social media as well. And they weren't trying to pick one side in the political race. They were trying to go after both sides. They were trying to aggravate the American population. I remember seeing in my Facebook screen, for example, an image of an African-American woman, a young woman, standing on the American flag. So what they were trying to do is inflame things. And here's what the Senate Intelligence Committee found out when they did an analysis of that those phony postings were liked and shared by Americans 31 million times. Now, what's happening today? Well, there's still disinformation and misinformation circling. I think the United States government is doing a better job at blocking foreign interference, but it can't completely block everything. But artificial intelligence is a new variable in all of this. In fact, we heard from a speaker that we had, Miles Taylor, that he described that incident with the Internet Research Agency. And he said, you know what, they had hundreds of employees and many millions of dollars spent in that operation. And he said, today, a handful of people with commercially available AI tools could replicate that effort. So you can kind of see how misinformation and disinformation is a huge concern. And so we need to take steps to try to help the public be better prepared and to counter those effects in our politics.
Sure. So are there certain things then that that LeaderEthics is doing, awareness building around this, but are there other things that you're really working towards to sort of help inoculate us from misinformation or disinformation?
Yeah. Well, there's another slide I'll bring up now, and that's talking about some things that we call the things that should go in your toolkit, your personal toolkit. How do you cope with this? Because I think it's the most effective place to start is at the local level and at the personal level. And so if you look here, we have some resources that could be a very useful tool for you. We support the work of Braver Angels. This is a national organization. They have a presence in Wisconsin, and they have workshops on how to depolarize your political concerns within. In other words, to be able to be a better listener and appreciate the complexity of issues, so that they're not all black and white or red and blue. And then they do have these workshops that will bring in people who have strong political views on the left side and the right side, and they will help them to mutually try to better understand and listen and appreciate each other's concerns. So if you're in a workplace or the Chamber of Commerce or a social organization and you have these dynamics, they're actually a good resource that could come in and help work through some of these things for you. The National Conflict Resolution Center has other workshops as well, and they can also be a good resource for helping people to appreciate the differences and be better able to cope with those concerns. And then we like the work that the Wisconsin Alliance for Civility and Trust, WISACT, is doing. They're a partner with the Carter Center, a national organization, and they have an affiliation with about a dozen different organizations that are available as a resource to come into a community or an organization to try to help out. But there's also things that can be done at the personal level. Now, we encourage people to do fact checking, and I've listed some of the fact check organizations that are out there that we recommend, but there are many others. And it's sometimes just a simple thing to do, and when you see something that comes across your screen or when somebody says something, to do a quick fact check, and now you can kind of see where that is, if that's true or false or somewhere in between. Mm-hmm. Then we go to the next screen shows the different things that could become an added resource if you want to become a better media consumer. There's an organization called All Sides, and they have ratings of hundreds of different media organizations, and they rate them on the political spectrum from liberal to conservative. And the idea is that if you see something coming across your screen, you can quickly check and say, okay, I'm seeing where that's coming from, and now I can appreciate where that fits in. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's right or wrong, it's just giving you a better view of that that story. Then there's a couple organizations, The Flip Side and Tangle News, that will take the same story and they'll show you the media coverage from the conservative side and from the liberal side. Now that's really helpful because you can look at that issue, the issue of the day, and you can get a sense of what people are saying or reading or hearing from across the political spectrum, and it's in one source. And I think that's a good resource for people to use. Rumor Guard is, they're affiliated with the News Literacy Project, the national effort, and they will, in a quick internet search, give you lots of rumors that you're probably hearing out there and where they fit in the truth spectrum. And then finally, there's an organization called NewsGuard, and now this is a for-profit venture, so it's not for everybody. So you have to pay a fee for the service. But what they'll do is they'll literally give you click on a website and they'll give you somewhere how truthful or the absence of truth that they have in their reputation or their work. And so maybe for a larger organization or a company that was concerned about having disinformation or misinformation somehow infect their work or their workplace, that could be a good resource. So let's go back to the regular slide in the conversation. I think you can see some of these things as the tools that we encourage people to use so that they're better prepared, so they don't get caught up in the dynamics that are out there.
Sure. And that leads me to a question personally. So we're being bombarded with news all the time, right? Largely thanks to these, to social media, just these little snippets and little sound bites. Is there something that, when you see a headline, is there something that raises a red flag in your head about like, I want to check that? What do you use as for your own sort of personal compass about, boy, I'm not sure about that. I want to investigate that a little bit further.
Well, you can't fact check everything.
Right.
and so yeah, I think the answer to that question for me is, if it's an issue that I deem as a priority or it's important to something, either in our community or me personally or something else, then I'll dig into it and I'll use one of these resources. But the other part is we are being bombarded. There's an absolute information overload with these issues, and so I think you have to develop almost a thicker skin to be able to survive this and recognize that you can't. You're swimming in a sea of misinformation. Focus on the swimming, not the sea.
Mm-hmm. That's a hopeful approach, which is that sets up this next question nicely. At the Sustainability Institute, one of the big things that we try to do, as you know, is embrace hope. Mm-hmm. As we work through really challenging times that we're all facing. I noticed that on the LeaderEthics blog, you wrote a piece on politics and the importance of hopefulness. So how do you see the overlap between the work of the Sustainability Institute and your work with LeaderEthics in regards to hope and the promise of hope?
Well, there's a couple of things that help frame this for me. First of all, we have to recognize that we haven't become, as individuals, universally polarized. That when you see something that's coming across social media, the studies have shown that it's really coming from the extremes over here. A lot of the volume is coming from them, and it's not coming from here. And so we're hearing a disproportionate representation of these heated issues. And so we need to recognize that if that's not us, let's find those people, let's appeal to the people that aren't caught up in that. And so that's a really important thing to start. And the data supports that. In fact, the data supports that if you talk about people who don't believe in our elections, that a high percentage of Democrats and Republicans have confidence that their vote will count in Wisconsin in November. Okay, so if we focus on that, that helps a lot. I think the second thing is that people are in leadership roles, and they need to recognize that the leadership actions to try to bring people together aren't different just because there's politics involved. We need to recognize that the political divide is a structural conflict, and there are other structural conflicts. There's the conflict between labor and management. There's the conflict between the nurses and the doctors in the healthcare, or the teachers and the counselors in education, and or in communities between the citizens and law enforcement. If we recognize that it's a structural conflict, if those things are happening in your company or organization or your community, and you see that in all of these other cases, people will roll up their sleeves and try to do something. Leaders will understand they need to try to lead. They'll try to do team building. They'll recognize teamwork when it's in place. They might isolate an individual if they're causing the conflict. They'll do the heavy lifting to try to bring people together. And we shouldn't view that any different if there's politics supposedly involved. If your employees are having a battle because of this, you have tools that are available. And some of those resources I shared later could readily help. But you have to be willing to do the heavy lifting as a leader and address that. And here's the thing. If leaders don't take action on a structural conflict, it never gets better. It always gets worse. And so that's no different in these other examples, and it's certainly the same here too. So expecting leaders, whatever their role is, their title is, to lead is a critical element. I think a third thing for me is that we need to recognize that there are politics at the national and state level that they're massive and they're maybe beyond our control. But there are important things that we can do at the local level, and that's where we should be focusing. In fact, the trust in media has dropped in recent years, but it's still much higher in local media. And the trust in government has dropped, but in local government, it's much higher. The same thing with other community local organizations. So when we try to start here in our local community to try to build some of the trust and so on, it's the most influential thing we can do, and it's the thing that can produce the most likely positive results. And so it's the place to start, and I think that is what creates hopefulness.
Sure. And what is continuing with this idea of trust, why is trust and trust in local leaders and local organizations, why is that important to climate change and to addressing some of these environmental issues that we're up against?
Well, think about it. If there's denial about the impact of climate change, it's a huge barrier for us to overcome. And if that becomes something that's readily accepted by the population, then the result is our inaction. And so the issues are very much the same. You really have to build a confidence that you can do things. The things that can produce the best results can start locally. And then that can show you that you're not alone and that there are many others that are in that place as well. And so I just see such a strong parallel between those issues.
Mm-hmm. So UN SDG Goal 16 talks about the importance of developing accountability and transparency in the institutions that help out people, and ensuring responsive and inclusive and participatory and representative decision making at all levels, right? Local and state and national. Now, clearly, your organization, LeaderEthics, is moving us in that direction, right? Toward those outcomes. How can people specifically get involved with LeaderEthics?
Well, those goals that you've described there, they sound a lot like those 4 principles I talked about, don't they? And the place to start is to help people realize that those are right and healthy expectations. And they're not misplaced. They're the right things to be expecting. And so then if you expect that, we can become a resource. You can become a member. That's a way to become not only engaged in learning about these issues, but we actively recruit our members to be involved in projects that we're working on. It's important to also recognize that with those layers, there are things that we certainly can't do alone. And so we've actively been seeking partnerships with organizations to try to address some of those issues. I'll give you 3 examples. We have been working with an organization called American Promise. Their goal is to pass a constitutional amendment that will allow states and the federal government to regulate campaign finance. And the money that is being spent on elections and the way it's being spent right now is distorting so many things. And so it's important that this process is underway. Now, it's not a small thing to change the Constitution. It's happened. We've done it before, 25 times. But despite the challenge, there are reasons to believe that enough citizens are concerned about this that there is the potential to have that become a reality. In fact, in Wisconsin last year, one of the steps is you get the legislature to approve a non-binding resolution. And that non-binding resolution doesn't have the effect of law, but it tells Congress that the state is registered in support of this constitutional amendment. We came very close to having that pass last spring. And I think we have an even better chance to have that resolution pass next year or the following year. And when you were a blue state like Wisconsin, we would become the 23rd state. But when you're a blue state, a purple state like Wisconsin, what you have is the opportunity to be a model for other states that are wrestling with those same concerns. So I think if Wisconsin does pass its resolution in the next year or 2, it could help get the ball rolling, and maybe we could see this become a reality. A second group that we're involved with is called Democracy Found, and they are working on advancing something called the Final 5 voting initiative in Wisconsin. And there are a half a dozen other states that are doing this as well. Alaska already has this model in place. They call it Final 4 voting. But it's got a couple of elements that are really important and timely for us. One of the big problems we have, particularly in Congress, is that we are so divided that when members of Congress try to work with someone on the other side of the aisle to try to solve an issue, they literally can be punished by being primaried by their own party. And when between 85 and 90% of the districts, the congressional districts in the country, are not competitive, that means those people are being elected in the primary election primarily, not the general election. Mm-hmm. And that's a huge concern. And there are some very specific examples where some of the best elected leaders have decided not to run because of being primaried or being threatened by being primaried. Well, the Final 4 voting and Final 5 voting process has an open primary that sends the top 4 or 5 candidates to the general election. So you can be primaried, but the voters are going to decide you have to be really doing poorly if you can't make the top 4 or 5. Now the general election decides whether that incumbent deserves to be reelected, and that's where it should be. That bill in Wisconsin also wasn't introduced last year, but it's got good support, bipartisan support, and I think there's a chance that that also could become a reality. That would address one of those key layers, that being the incentive to be divisive in Congress. The third issue is promoting election integrity. And so we've partnered with a couple of organizations called Keep Our Republic, which is a national group that is promoting public awareness about elections in Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. And a group called WISACT, and they are focusing on Wisconsin, and that both have the same goal, and that's to help build confidence that we have a very healthy and robust elections process in this state. And when there are challenges, we have paper documents to back up everything, and we run our elections fairly here. So we shouldn't lack confidence in that and get caught up in misinformation and disinformation. And so we've been very active, obviously, in this election year with those three. It's important to recognize that ethical leadership requires some electoral reform, and electoral reform requires ethical leadership.
Mm-hmm. So if you could leave our viewers with one takeaway, the most important message, what would that be?
Well, here's where I like to leave this, because it starts here. When you see these things and you have concerns, there are tools that you can access. There are steps that you can take. We just need to remember it's never too late to do the right thing. And so if these are thoughts and concerns you have, there are things you can do, and I just encourage people to take those steps.
Great. Thank you so much, Lee, for joining us today in Sustainability Chats. We've been talking with Lee Rosh, the Executive Director of LeaderEthics. For our members and our audience, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Sustainability Chats.
To stay connected with the Sustainability Institute and stay aware of upcoming events, head on over to our website to join our mailing list. Once again, we want to thank you for watching this Sustainability Chat. We hope to see you soon.